I work nights. Have for almost 8 years now. Third shift in a long-term care facility outside of a small town in central Ohio. And I'll be honest, I took the position because I needed the pay bump and I genuinely liked the quiet. Daytime at that place was chaotic in the way that healthcare always is. Call lights going off every 2 minutes, families hovering at the nurse's station, management walking the floor. At night, it was just me, another aide named Terry, and a traveling nurse named David, who rotated in every few weeks. That was it for a building with 42 residents. I am not a superstitious person. I grew up with parents who were very much of the if you can't explain it, you haven't looked hard enough variety, and that stuck with me. I had worked nights in 2 other facilities before this one, and I'd heard all the stories. The glowing lights, the residents who talked to people who weren't there, all of it. I always had an explanation. Sundowning is a real medical thing. Old buildings settle. People hear what they expect to hear at 3 a.m. when they're running on 4 hours of sleep and bad vending machine coffee. So when things started with room 14, I assumed I had an explanation. I was just wrong about what it was. Room 14 was at the far end of the east wing, and it had been empty for about 3 weeks when I started noticing anything. The previous resident, a woman named Margaret, mid-80s, sharp as a tack until the end, had passed away quietly in her sleep, and admissions hadn't filled the bed yet. Empty rooms weren't unusual. I passed it on every hourly round, same as the other rooms, and for the first few weeks of working there, I didn't think twice about it. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not a bad smell. That's what threw me. Long-term care has its smells, and you get used to them fast. This was different. It was floral, almost sweet. Roses, maybe, or something close. I remember stopping in the doorway around 2:10 a.m. on a Tuesday in late November and thinking the housekeeping staff had used a new cleaning product. I even made a mental note to ask about it in the morning. I didn't give it another thought. The smell was there again on Thursday. Same spot, same time, roughly. I stood in the doorway and looked around the room. Beds stripped, chairs tucked in, everything exactly as housekeeping would have left it. No air freshener plugged into the wall, no open window. The smell was faint, but definitely there, and it wasn't coming from anywhere I could identify. I told Terry about it the next night. She gave me a look I'd come to recognize, the careful, neutral expression of someone who knows something and has decided not to share it yet. She said, "Yeah, that room's a little weird." I asked her what she meant, and she said she just heard things from other staff, and she didn't want to color my experience with it. I told her I didn't believe in that stuff. She said, "Good, then it won't bother you." I know, I should have asked more questions. In hindsight, that was my first stupid decision, taking that answer and letting it go. The smell was one thing. What happened the following Monday was something else. I was doing my 1 a.m. round, and as I passed room 14, I noticed the door was slightly open. Not wide open, maybe 4 inches, just enough to let a thin bar of hallway light into the dark room. I remembered closing it fully on my previous round at midnight. The doors in that wing had a slight resistance to them. They didn't drift open on their own, at least not in my experience. I pushed the door shut and latched it and kept going. At 2:17 a.m., I came back around and the door was open again. Same amount, 4 or 5 inches. I stood there for a second longer than I should have. Then I went inside and checked the room, closet, bathroom, under the bed, and found nothing. No one. The window was latched from the inside, the way it always was. The room was empty and cold in the way empty rooms get cold, and the floral smell was stronger that night than it had ever been. I told myself the latch mechanism was worn and the door was drifting. I propped a folded paper towel behind the latch to create more resistance, a trick I'd used in other facilities, and went back to my rounds. The paper towel was on the floor when I came back at 3. The door was open. I got Terry. I showed her. She looked at the paper towel on the floor, looked at the door, and then looked at me in a way I did not like. She said, "Has anything else happened in there?" I told her about the smell. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very evenly, that Margaret, the woman who'd lived in that room, had grown roses her entire adult life. Her family had brought in a small rose bush in a pot just this past spring. The nursing staff had let her keep it on the windowsill. It had died a few weeks after Margaret did, and housekeeping had removed it. I want to be clear. I am aware that a story like that, told at 3 a.m. in a dark hallway, creates a certain emotional effect. I am aware of that. I noted it and I set it aside. What I could not set aside was what I found the following Wednesday. I had started checking room 14 at every single round by that point. I'm not proud of it. It felt like I was feeding into something, but I couldn't help it. It was a compulsion. Every hour I pushed open the door, looked inside, and confirmed the room was empty. At 3:52 a.m. on a Wednesday, the room was not empty. There was a woman sitting in the chair by the window. My very first immediate thought, was that one of the residents had wandered. It happens constantly in memory care. People get up in the night and end up in the wrong room. That was my thought, and it was a reasonable one, so I stepped inside and said something like, "Honey, let me help you get back to bed." I reached for the light switch. In the second before I found it and the fluorescence flickered on, the chair was occupied. An elderly woman in a pale nightgown sitting with her hands folded in her lap, facing the window. In the second after the lights came on, the chair was empty. I have thought about this a lot in the years since. I have told myself 100 times that I was tired, that the human brain at 3:52 a.m. after an 8-hour shift does things that would embarrass it in daylight. I believe this is probably true. What I cannot explain is what I found when I went to the chair and looked at the seat cushion. There was an impression in the cushion, like someone had been sitting there long enough to compress the foam. I filed an incident report, not about the woman, I didn't know how to describe that, but about the wandering concern, noting that I'd found evidence of possible room entry overnight. The director of nursing reviewed the hallway footage at my request. Camera covered the full corridor. For the entire span of my shift, no one had entered or exited room 14. Not once. They filled the room about 2 weeks later. New resident, a man named Gerald who needed a bed urgently. I heard from Terry that on his second night, he asked the day aide who the nice lady was who had visited him while he was sleeping. He described her as older, white hair, a pale nightgown. Staff told him it was probably a dream. He accepted that. The smell stopped when Gerald moved in. Completely. I still don't know what to do with that. It's been 4 years and I still work nights, just at a different facility. I asked for the transfer 6 months after all this happened, and I've never been fully able to articulate why to anyone who didn't work that ward. There was no explanation that satisfied me. A tired brain, the impression in the chair, the door I couldn't keep closed, and a woman who grew roses her whole life. I'm still holding all of it, and none of the pieces have fit themselves together. I need to explain what the drive was like before I tell you what happened, because I think it matters. My brother Callum lives about 2 hours north of me, up in the mountains in a part of western North Carolina that does not have great cell reception and has exactly one gas station per every 30 miles of road. I'd been making that drive twice a year for the better part of a decade, Christmas and once in the summer, and I knew it the way you know something after 100 repetitions. Every turn, every ridgeline, every radio dead zone. I was not someone who got lost on that road. This was October, 3 years ago. I'm an IT consultant, I work remotely, and I had decided to stay an extra week at Callum's after our fall visit because the work calendar was light and I wasn't ready to go back to city noise yet. So I ended up leaving on a Sunday afternoon around 4 p.m., which I knew was later than ideal. It would be fully dark by the time I hit the worst stretch of mountain road. But I'd driven it in the dark before, and I wasn't worried. The first hour was completely normal. I was listening to a podcast, the road was mostly mine, and I made every turn on autopilot the way I always did. The town of Briars Crossing is about halfway. It's not much. A gas station, a diner that's only open for breakfast and lunch, a feed store, maybe 200 residents scattered across the surrounding hills. I always registered it as a landmark. Briars Crossing means I'm halfway, another hour to the highway. I passed through it at 5:12 p.m. I remember glancing at the dashboard. And then at 5:52 p.m., I passed through Briar's Crossing again. I sat with that for a second. I know what you're thinking. I must have missed a turn, doubled back without realizing it. But that road doesn't loop. It goes north to south, one direction, and there are no turnoffs between Briar's Crossing and the next town that would bring you back. I had not turned around. I was certain of this, the way you're certain of the things your hands do, without your having to think about them. I had not turned around, and yet there was the feed store, and there was the gas station, and the clock said I had driven for 40 minutes since I was last here. The gas station was still open. I pulled in. I asked the woman at the counter if there was any road construction I might have hit that would have rerouted me. She looked at me like I'd said something strange and said, no, the road had been clear all week. I asked if there was any way I could have made a loop accidentally, maybe missed a junction. She said no. This was not a road network at work, no loops. I asked her one more question, and I want to be precise about this. I asked her if anyone else had come in tonight acting confused about the road. She put down what she was doing, looked at me very carefully, and said, "You're the second person to ask me that this month." She didn't know anything about the other person, just that they'd been confused, had asked similar questions, had filled up their tank, and left. She didn't remember much. Late at night, she'd been tired, couldn't recall the make of the car. I drove the second half of that trip with every light on in the car and the podcast off. I was not scared exactly. I kept looking for the rational explanation, kept running through possibilities. Medical episode? I had no history of anything like that. Carbon monoxide? The car was 3 years old. Microsleep? For 40 minutes on an unfamiliar stretch of mountain road without going off the edge? I called Callum when I got to the highway and told him what happened. He's an engineer, very practical, and his first response was to ask about my tire pressure and whether I'd eaten enough. I love him for it, honestly. I gave all those explanations a fair hearing. What I can't account for is the 40 minutes, not the confusion. I can construct explanations for that. The time. My phone log shows no calls made, no apps opened, no GPS activity between 5:12 and 5:52. I had been somewhere with no cell signal for 40 minutes, which tracks with that stretch of road, but I had not, by any measurement I can apply, been on that road. The mileage added to my car that evening was consistent with a single pass, not two. I drove back to my city that night instead of waiting until morning, which added an extra 2 hours. That was probably irrational, but it's what I did. I haven't made that drive at night since. Callum thinks I'm being weird about it. He's probably right. I just want to know where I was for 40 minutes. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not where I went. I don't think I want to know that. Just where I was. My wife Priya and I moved into our house in the spring of 2019, and I can tell you that we are the most aggressively non-superstitious people I know. We're both engineers. We bought this house because the crawl space ventilation was solid and the roof had been replaced 18 months prior. That is the level of romantic sentiment we brought to the purchase. We have a dog. Her name is Wren. She's a 5-year-old shepherd mix, and she is the most adaptable, even-tempered animal I've ever known. She has never once in her life barked at something that wasn't actually there. She doesn't get spooked. She runs into walls at full speed chasing tennis balls and shakes it off. I want you to understand who Wren is before I tell you what she did, because her behavior is the anchor of the whole thing. The house has a long central hallway that connects the living area to the 2 bedrooms at the back. It's about 30 feet, hardwood floors, a bathroom door on the left halfway down, nothing unusual. Wren traversed this hallway probably 20 times a day from the moment we moved in, fetching toys from the bedroom, following us from room to room, doing her full-speed nighttime wall laps. 6 months after we moved in late October, Wren stopped crossing the hallway. Not slowly, not gradually. One day she was fine, and the next she wasn't. She would come to the hallway entrance, the point where the living room floor meets the hallway floor. There's a slight threshold strip there, and she would stop. She'd stand there, wait slightly back, hackles not fully raised but not relaxed either, and stare down the hall. She wouldn't make a sound. She'd just look. This happened every time for 4 days. Priya's explanation was that there was an animal in the walls, a mouse maybe, or a squirrel that had gotten into the eaves. That was a reasonable explanation, and I took it seriously. I went through the crawl space, I went through the attic, I checked every inch of baseboard in the hallway. No evidence of anything. No droppings, no gnaw marks, no sounds when I pressed my ear to the wall. On the 5th night, I got up at around 1 a.m. to use the bathroom. I was half asleep, not thinking about any of it, and I found Ren sitting at the hallway threshold in the dark, perfectly still, just staring. I stood behind her for a moment. The hallway was dark, the bathroom nightlight was the only source, and it was quiet. I couldn't see anything, I couldn't hear anything, I couldn't smell anything, though I leaned forward and genuinely tried. I watched her for maybe a minute. Her ears were forward, her eyes were tracking. She was watching something move. I am going to be honest with you. I turned on every light in that hallway immediately. I checked both bedrooms, the closets, the bathroom, under every piece of furniture. There was nothing in that house except me and Priya and Ren. I told Priya in the morning. She suggested we call a pest control company anyway, which we did. The tech found nothing, not even the typical stuff you find in older homes. He said it was one of the cleaner crawl spaces he'd worked in. Here is the part I keep coming back to. About 2 weeks after Ren started refusing the hallway, I was doing some organization in the bedroom closet, and I found on the top shelf, pushed against the back wall, a photograph. A printed photo, 4x6, the kind you'd get developed. It showed the interior of our house, our living room, our couch, our specific furniture, but not our furniture exactly. Our layout, our wall paint, but with different objects in it, like someone had been in our house before we owned the furniture we have and taken a photo of it. This made no sense. We had bought the house from an estate. The previous owner had lived there alone for many years and had passed away. We'd done a full clean out before move-in, and the closet had been empty. We were certain of this. I asked around with the neighbors, one of whom had lived on the street for 30 years, and she confirmed the previous owner had lived alone. No family she ever saw visit, certainly no one who would have our furniture in their photos. I don't know whose photograph it was. I don't know how it got into a closet we had already cleaned. I don't know what Ren was watching move down our hallway for 2 weeks in the middle of the night. What I know is that after I found the photo and showed it to Priya, Rin crossed the hallway without hesitation the following morning, like nothing had ever happened. She has been perfectly fine since. We still have the photograph. It's in a Ziploc bag in a box in the garage. Neither of us looks at it, but neither of us has thrown it away. I'm not sure what we're keeping it for. I don't think I'm ready to answer that question. So